Welcome to Doing Good by Doing Better, the podcast for world shapers, not spectators. I'm Margaret Rogers, CEO of Pariveda, a professional services firm that helps make potential possible for our clients. On this show, I talk with founders, executives, and innovators who share hard lessons, bold ideas, and real strategies for purpose-driven growth. This episode will offer practical insights you can use this week to solve forward, because at Pariveda, we know that doing good only endures when we keep learning how to do better. Welcome back for part 2 of the ECHO Leadership Framework. In part 1, we laid the foundation of ECHO and walked through the first pillar, ecosystem, which is the understanding a leader needs of the full system around a decision and thinking clearly about how that decision carries the impact over time. In part 2, we'll walk through the remaining 3 pillars, courage, humility, and ownership. Let's jump in. I want to start with courage because once you see the ecosystem and the way all the moving parts interact, the next question is whether you're willing to act with clarity and integrity inside of it. When I think about courage and why it's so important is because in all cases in a workplace, you have to be able to take calculated risks. There's a lot of things that come into play for yourself as an individual, not only being able to align with your values and have the courage to talk about and stick with those values and not feel like you're compromising anything about it, but you also have to have the courage to be able to look in the mirror and have an honest conversation with yourself about the things that you may or may not be doing well, or the things that you may not intend to have others feel a certain way. You have to think about the intention and the perception. And having that honest conversation with yourself can be really difficult. Without that, it really does hinder a lot of growth. So there's a lot of courage on the individual level in any organization to unlock potential. Unlocking an organizational potential starts with that individual and being able to create an environment that allows for that courage. And one of the things is you manage more and more people and you lead more and more people is you realize that people are just so beautifully diverse. You're not going to make everybody happy all the time. And accepting that, you have to have courage to accept that you're not going to be loved by everybody. You're going to have to make choices that don't agree with some. And there's always going to be somebody who thinks that doesn't work for them. And so even though as humans, we want to be accepted, we want to be part of a community, it's very difficult to be at a certain level and expect to make everybody happy. At the firm, we really talk about equity. We think about fairness. We try to be transparent and appropriately so for what we need to do. And it's part of our decision-making all the time. We don't make decisions half-heartedly. We're always very thoughtful and intentional because our entire design and ecosystem is complex. And yet we need it to be adaptive. And therefore we need people to feel okay with taking those calculated risks. And really, what does that look like? So we're on that journey of learning that area. I think when we build up trust also with our clients, that's really important. I think some of the best client relationships I've ever had are the ones where they were ready for a battle. And they said, I think you did something not so great, and I'm ready to battle you for it because I think you're going to defend yourself. And I'm like, you're right. Don't worry. We're going to take care of it. And you can just see they're pleasantly surprised, but a little bit of this wind in their sails got taken out because they normally would see somebody push back and say, hey, it's not our fault. It's your fault, back and forth. And, when you don't do that and you say, yeah, you're right, this is the right thing to do, it's building trust through your actions, through your words, but mostly through your actions and your position. And that was very meaningful. I've made friendships that way that have been long-term. And I think about what we're doing right now in terms of courage with our certification for B Corp, right? It takes courage for a company to open up and say, we are held to a standard that is not our own. It's one thing to be able to say, hey, we did a good job. And based on our standards, well, you're probably going to do really well based on your own standards. But when you have to meet somebody else's standards and also be called out that you're not doing well in certain areas, that you have room for improvement, there's a certain level of courage that happens to expose yourself to the community and be part of a community. My hope is that our future leaders and our clients and our communities, that we all give each other courage so that we can unlock who we need to be. We need to change how people think about business, and we need to think about how business is executed. And not everyone will agree because people have different priorities, but having the courage to do things counter to what everybody else does takes a lot of grit. One of the things I think is really interesting is the different types of courage. Leaders every day are going to hit things that deal with morals and values, like the courage to be able to stick to them and not be pressured into something else. You're going to make strategic choices, and you're going to have the courage and the conviction to stick with it, because there's going to be people who will doubt that or maybe not see what you see. And that requires a lot of trust building, because businesses are especially now, businesses are very turbulent. And so people feel like they're in the waves of the storm and they're trying to figure out, do I follow the captain or do I jump off the ship? And that I totally get. It's not always clear, but that courage to follow or to be part of something that's really difficult that can become something very beautiful is huge. We talked a lot about the abundance mindset and how your attitude really matters on whether you can do something or not. There's definitely studies out there that talk about the grit that somebody has to have to overcome cancer or to get up and walk again. And I think in terms of companies that want to be resilient, you have to build a workforce that does believe in the growth and the abundance mindset. Without that, you can't see the possibilities and you only see the risks. You walk away from opportunities because of fear, not because of any sort of rational decision making. In a world where the business is really good, you don't really get challenged. You don't really get tested. It's when things are difficult, when things are volatile, or when things feel scarce, that is when you're going to get pushed. And so you need a lot of courage there. One of the things when I first started my very modest services company, I think I mentioned this before, but one of the things I remember somebody saying is, your world will change when you hire your first employee, and you worry about cash flow all the time. And I had to find a lot of conviction. I believed things would work out. I believed if I worked hard enough and I did the right things and made the right choices, I believed that everything would work out. And again, I had mechanisms in place that allowed me a level of luxury in being an entrepreneur, because I wasn't hard pressed to get paid right away. Like, I had built up enough savings. I knew I was going to enter this world of uncertainty. So I knew how to prepare myself walking into it. I think at one point I was a little underestimating how long some of the larger companies wouldn't pay me. It was months and months and months. So that was a little longer than what I anticipated, but it took a lot of conviction. And historically have all sorts of different things, even going back to grade school, where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to figure that out. And even though it feels like it's going to be really hard, I'm going to give it a shot. And I wasn't always successful at it. And it didn't feel good, but I always learned a lot and gained a little bit more hardening about the things that I really wanted to do. I think courage really starts from a strong belief in self. And I think when you have a strong belief in yourself, a strong desire to learn, and a strong belief that failures are part of learning, then you end up with more courage and the belief that you can do really difficult things that feel insurmountable to others, because you're going to have that practice and that grit to go through the really difficult things. There are lots of difficult things out there. We're all going to get hit with challenges every single day. The belief in learning, the belief in bettering oneself, the belief that failure is okay, I think helps build courage. I think people might get knocked down in such a way that might feel very devastating. That can snuff out courage, which I think as a leader, going back to having the right environment for people and being able to trust and give courage. I think if you don't create that kind of environment, you can't nurture people in the same way. You leave it up to the individual when they could be so much more enabled by all of these different types of tactics and interactions that they have within their workplace that would lead them to build up their courage further. So overall, if courage helps you take action. The next pillar is humility, and it shapes really how each of us takes action. Humility to me is always prioritizing the mission and prioritizing the people and prioritizing what we do above any sort of self interest, which is why we're different as a firm, right? We're not here to make exorbitant amounts of money, which sounds very strange, right? We're not trying to grow and grow as fast as we can and sell ourselves off because we think we have a very unique value proposition in the world, and we don't want to be put in a position where we compromise on our values and who we are and what we believe in, which is that when we work together, each of us will have enough and each of us will grow and we will have a very fulfilling life. And it's just a very different viewpoint. I think when you look at the way leadership is framed in this way, we think about stewardship, right? We choose to teach. We don't punish. We choose to give direct conversations. Even if sometimes we're still working at it. We want to listen, and we know everybody has something important to say. The beauty of diversity is they see it in a different way and they express it in a different way. And that requires more humility to understand that not any one person knows it all, that we can always be learning and making ourselves better. And that when you model that kind of humility and integrity, then that role modeling hopefully influences others to be the same way to each other. And I think in many ways we've been able to achieve that. We have clients that say, why do your people care so much? And they care so much because they're in an environment that cares a lot. So when I think about what humility looks like at the individual, we talk about humility being mindful that you are not the most important thing. Actually, the things that you do for others is the most important thing. I think one has to be very appreciative of the fact that no individual knows everything in the world and that we are always in this process of developing and evolving and learning about oneself and learning about others. I think as a company, we model a lot of servant leadership, making those sacrifices, leaning in to each other. One of the hardest things that we've had to go through is we did have to do pay reductions in order to save more jobs for when the times were better. And that was difficult to do. And the higher up you were, the more of a pay cut you took. And that wasn't the case for every single company out there, right? They just did the cuts and they still got paid 7 or 8 figures. And that did not happen here. To us, the long term outcomes that we could make and the longevity of our people was more important. In terms of clients, it's the same thing. That continued honesty, transparency, building trust, being there. We always talk about being the first call. We want to be the first call, and that our humility never allows us to stop listening to our clients. Because once we've done that, then we've not created the kind of partnership that we want to be able to create, which is being able to listen and also being able to bring fresh ideas to the table together. And I do think that one of the things we try to strive for is seeking feedback from our community. Again, our community through B Corp or CECP or the other organizations that we run with and we partner with, seeking that feedback so that we can always be a better version of ourselves as an organization and as individuals, right? How we partner is very important. And we know we're not always going to be perfect, but we know that when we aren't, we will integrate it back into ourselves and reflect and learn to make sure that we're doing the right things. And how do we know we're doing the right things? How do we test that against ourselves? We continuously use that reflection to press ourselves to be better. Again, a lot of this is through role modeling because we want our future leaders to experience what we believe is the right thing. And our goal is to be able to bring that forward through our future leaders. Like for me, I didn't come to Pariveda thinking, hey, I'm going to go be the CEO. I actually didn't know what was going on when I first came to Pariveda. I came as a client facing consultant, practicing my craft, meeting clients and doing the things that I love to do, which is learn from others and get to a solution and see it be successful. I didn't know what the timeline was in terms of any sort of leadership changes. And it started to bubble up a little bit later. One of the things that I really believe is that it is easy to be distracted by things like this. And all of a sudden you do the wrong things for the wrong reasons. You might even do the right things for the wrong reasons. Neither of those are good in my book. What I started to do was, I was curious about maybe parts of the role, obviously curious about your own career, everybody is, but I didn't think, wow, if I do this will put me in a better position to be the CEO. I just thought, you know what? I'm just going to try to do the right thing. If I do the right thing, I'll feel good about myself and I'll feel good about the contributions I make to the firm. And I did that for a long time. And if I was called to serve, I would go and do my best. One of the things that was interesting about my transition into Pariveda is at the time, the leadership style was very open ended. So you would go in and they'd be like, what do you want to do? What do you need me to do? Was often something you would say to your supervisor, and your supervisor would say, okay, I need these 10 things, go do these 10 things. And you go, great, got it. I got my marching orders. And often the feedback, the response you would get in this organization is, what do you think we need? What do you think you want to do? And it's interesting when you're presented with a blank page, and in this world, you're often not conditioned to talk about the blank page and to have the luxury to be able to think about the blank page. And it was a number of times I was presented this option and I kept thinking, I have no idea what I'm going to say. I don't even know what that means or what that looks like. It was a good learning and challenge for me in that. But even when I entered into the process for the selection, again, I had come to the decision that I was okay with whatever the outcome. I was going to do my best. I wasn't going to be really relaxed about it, but I was going to do my best. And it was interesting when you reach an internal mental state about the potential outcomes and you embrace the acceptance of that, everything all of a sudden felt really calm for me. I know in my past, like interviewing for a job or interviewing for a client, and you get really nervous. You can almost feel your heart rate increase and you can feel your voice shake, and it doesn't feel great. In this one, I thought it was really interesting because when I walked in to have the conversation with the board in the interview process, in the presentation process, I had embraced this outcome that I was going to stay and make the next person successful for a period of time. I was going to do my best. And in the end, I was going to be accepting of whatever the outcomes were. And when I held those three things to be true in my world, everything just slowed down and calmed down for me. And everything felt right. When I got the call that I was accepted and selected, I was definitely surprised. I was also glad and happy and ecstatic. And then you go through all the processing, the information that you're being presented. And the only thing that I could think about was how humble I was to be chosen, and that my job is to take Pariveda to the next chapter, through the next chapter, and help the leaders see how do you grow a business to scale and how do you make it continuously consistent and successful in performance. So for me, when I think about Echo as a leadership model, there's so many things that underlie the currents of that leadership model. And I think the huge thing, even though I don't want it to sound trite, but I truly believe that I am a servant of the firm and that my goal is to put it into better footing, to be resilient, to be adaptable, to continue its beautiful complexity and to show it to the world. And that will position it to be very unique and to be, in some ways, viewed upon as the model is what I'm hoping for. So if humility supports growth with integrity, I think the last pillar that we think about is ownership. And that growth to outcomes is something that's going to be enduring. Creating ownership is really important because for us, being owned by ourselves, being a privately held company, allows us to have the agency to do the right thing, to do the things that we believe a business should be doing, which is making sure we're doing good contributions to society, that we're offering something very unique, which is amazing thinkers, innovative thinkers that care about our clients and care about how we do our work, not just the fact that we are doing work, the fact that we are accountable to our success and the part of the success that we bring to the firm, and that we are part of a greater purpose, right? People need to feel ownership on that, and they need to be enabled to have ownership in that in every step of the way. And one of the things that is important when you're thinking about structure in that ownership, it can be very scary for a leader because you often think that the more you control, the more you're able to control the outcomes when actually that's not the case. That's actually what is a false satisfier. In fact, you need to build it from the inside out and enable a lot of your leaders to do the things that need to be done. And sometimes I think what we're learning is in order to do that at scale, you first have to teach and get onto the same language and on the same page. And then you can start to expand that ownership more and more. I think our organization will get to a point where we all have ownership and accountability over the areas that we have to run and be successful at and understand how we interconnect with each other so that we're not making decisions in a vacuum. It can just cause a lot of tension within an organization because people are making decisions that don't align with the greater business. And that's what gets you in trouble, right? We've seen that from a Budweiser campaign that seemed like such a great idea probably at the time that didn't work out so well to where companies were sourcing some of their labor for clothing in fast fashion and finding out little kids are in those different factories that are being used for child labor. So these types of decisions and ownership, understanding how they should be thinking about their judgment calls that they make, their decision making, how it fits in the greater system, and does it align with the values? Does it align with our purpose and mission is really important in being able to scale that ownership. So when I think about from the individual again, you're giving employees permission and accountability, and they have to have the courage to own their work, right? To grow and have that impact. From a business standpoint, you have to codify and frankly institutionalize your values, your purpose and mission. And it can't be a poster on the wall that you never talk about. It has to be integrated into everything that you do over and over again. So it really is part of the culture, whether it be at the firm level or in the micro level, right? We have micro cultures that occur in each of our offices. We have micro cultures that happen within teams and accounts. And you can have all of it together and still have them be pretty harmonious. So at the company level, having that shared accountability is really important. I think for clients, modeling that ownership and being able to give permission to resolve the things that need to happen within a client and empower people to build those levels of trust within the company is really a way for us to, again, be a first call kind of firm. And of course, being able to be accountable through things like our reporting, our impact reports, being accountable and owning the things that we do that impacts our community in a positive way, hopefully, is another place where we really energize that ownership. So when I think about what we try to do within our organization, every piece is intentional. And when we don't think about it that way, and when we don't integrate it together, then things get out of whack. Like one thing runs away from itself and it is not integrated back into the system. And then our firm ends up feeling the tension from it and it requires more correction. I think a good example is think like a business owner. We encourage people to think like a business owner. And why we use that terminology is because when you're a talent development company, you're hiring people with all different levels of experience, right? Not everybody owns a business, but they understand the basic concepts, which is you want to be responsible for how you spend. You want to be responsible for how you make money. And every one of us is a part of it. And in order for our mission to be enabled, we have to be a profitable business. And so we talk a lot about thinking like a business owner. And it looks different for different people. For our younger entry level folks, think like a business owner is everything from being part of the community and being engaged in addition to doing their billable work and serving our clients to satisfaction, if not delight, to our executive leaders, which is making sure that we're hitting our targets and that we're continuing to build those relationships and expand those relationships like any other business. And we're aligning to the things that they are trying to achieve because that's what makes a good partner. And in terms of that ownership, we are all accountable. I think in a lot of companies, it's a rare thing that it's usually one big serious episode. It's usually a series of small little things that add up into impact, either positive or negative. Here's a real life example. One of my clients, way back in my early career, I used to do a lot of telecom work. And in the .com days, of course, telecom was booming, right? Everything was really going, and there were a lot of startups in the telecom space. And one of the telecom companies that I worked for, that I will not name, at the time, we were doing a lot of process understanding because back then, telecom companies actually would have to bid on lines and the quality of a phone line point to point for your long distance. So if you were sitting in DC and you wanted to make a call to Italy, there was a line for that. And you paid and you would bid on the line based on the quality of that line and the clarity. So if it was really staticky, it was cheaper. And this was based on the infrastructure at any given time and the load that was going across that particular line. And I remember we had to talk to 3 layers in the bidding process. So we wanted to create this more automated bidding platform rather than how they were doing it, which was very manual through salespeople. So when we asked about the pricing structure, we had people that would tell us, we are given the floor of the price and we can go no lower than that. We had another group say, well, we're actually given the okay price, but we also know we can go 20% lower. And then we had another group that said, well, we are given the low price plus 20, and we know that we can go another 5%. So everybody had a different floor, and it turns out nobody was right. And I remember sitting in the meeting saying, hey, here's what we found. We see 3 different methods on how different groups are doing this, and we want to understand what is your intent. And they said, oh my gosh, I can't believe, are you sure this is what they said? And we weren't recording things back then, but we were just like, yes, we're very sure this is what we were told. And as we saw the pattern, that's why we wanted to talk to you. And he said, yeah, that is very wrong. We actually give them something different. We give them the cost. So they were in certain groups, they were actually selling below cost and they had no idea. And they were doing it for a really long time. Usually things like this, it's death by 1,000 cuts. It's things that had good intent and people were trying to be successful without clearly understanding of what was going on. And so when you think about judgment calls and ownership that you want people to take, you also need to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we have the same level of understanding, because otherwise you end up with death by 1,000 cuts. We talk about the ecosystem, courage, humility, and ownership. And for me, this is a culmination of all my experiences of what has become very important to me, especially here at Pariveda. My hope is that people will carry this forward and understand and be influenced by it and see the intention behind the leadership and the decisions that I make. My aim is to create those echoes, the rippling effects to different people across our firm and to make a multi-generational impact. And I know the leadership that comes after me will continue to take the firm even further than where my tenure ends. So leaving that community stronger than where I found it is a huge goal. I found that when leaders create this purpose-filled version of their echo, they impact individuals, they impact the firm, they impact their clients or their customers. They think about the communities around themselves. They impact the entire system. That happens in a business because we're all connected in one way or the other. And sometimes the smallest ripple can become the biggest waves outside of our firm. And so that's what I'm hoping for generations to come, that they will see that where we started with a small impact and small ripple will create waves of influence throughout the rest of society. So that's part 2 of the Echo Leadership Framework. In part 1, we covered ecosystem, the idea that leadership decisions move through people, systems, and communities over time. Today, we walk through the remaining 3 pillars. Courage helps you act with clarity and integrity. Humility keeps your leadership rooted in service. Ownership makes impact endure because people feel accountable and connected to a bigger purpose than their role. If you want to apply this week, take one decision you're carrying and run it through these 3 questions. 1, where do I need to be more direct, even if it's uncomfortable? 2, where do I need to lead with service and curiosity instead of assumption? And 3, where do I need clear accountability so that the outcome endures and ownership is shared. And that brings us to the end of season 1 of Doing Good by Doing Better. This season, we sat down with leaders who are aligning purpose with profit, scaling impact without compromise, and sharing the hard-earned lessons behind responsible growth. If you joined us for one episode or the whole season, thank you for being here. If there's an episode you found impactful, send it to a colleague and leave us a review. That support helps spread the message of using business as a force for good. We'll be back in the spring for season 2 with new guests, new stories, and practical insights for leaders who want to make an impact. Until then, keep doing good by doing better. Thanks for listening. I'm Margaret Rogers, and I'll see you in season 2.